Welcome to another episode of the Svarim Chatter podcast. I'm Nachi Weinstein. Short programming note, there will be 2 Hanukkah-themed episodes. One will be a bonus episode this coming Wednesday. Another one will be next Sunday, and that one will be about the books of Maccabees. And sponsorships are available for both. If anyone is interested, you can reach out to me, svarimchatter@gmail.com, or you can check out the information and links in the show's notes below. Regarding this episode, this was recorded before the book was published, so the book is now available in your local Judaica stores, artscroll.com, or you can check out the link in the show's notes. To sponsor an episode or to support the podcast, please email me, svarimchatter@gmail.com, or check out the link and information in the show's notes below. You can also find a link to subscribe to the Svarim Chatter WhatsApp community, where I post new books, new Svarim, book deals, and so on. That's also in the show's notes. And finally, if you can please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen, whether 24/6, Apple, Spotify, and so on. And with that, enjoy the episode. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Svarim Chatter podcast. On this episode of the podcast, I'm going to be joined by Rabbi Yisroel Besser, otherwise known as Yisroel Besser. We'll be discussing his new book, published by Artscroll, called Kotzk, the Rebbe, the Message, the Legacy. And we'll be discussing Kotzk. So thank you, Yisroel, for joining me.
It's a tremendous honor to be here in this studio, in this beautiful, beautiful room, surrounded by really the nicest furnishings I could ever imagine. I'm probably over on the Lavoi Sachmait, just looking around at this farm, at the way you have it set up over here. I could sit here for a week.
So yeah, we're recording this in person in my attic, which is on YouTube. So for those that haven't seen the videos, I did do videos from here, from the attic. So there's a lot of books, a lot of history books, really a lot of stuff in here that you can definitely sit and
I feel like
read.
A kid, my parents used to take us to FAO Schwartz when we were kids. Came from Montreal, and my eyes were wide. That's what I feel like over here.
So tell the listeners a little bit about yourself and your background.
A little bit about myself and my background.
Yeah.
I guess in the context of this conversation, as it pertains to my choice of a career, I guess. Okay, grew up in Montreal. Probably the defining biographical feature that contributed to what I do is my grandfather. His name was Yisroel Besser. He was a rabbi on the west side of Manhattan, and he was the most scholarly, learned, insightful, curious. He knew a lot, and he always wanted to know more. So you sat at his table, and he was a sponge of information. He knew a lot, but he wanted to hear other people talk too. He was a great listener, not just a talker. And about really every Jewish history was extremely important to him. But at the same time, he was a very sharp observer of the social contemporary from life, on the west side especially. He could have guests on a regular Shabbos. When I'm jumping a little bit, when I was a bacher in Lakewood here in BMG, I was here for a year plus, and I would go every Shabbos to my grandfather. That was my best time with him because it wasn't Yantif. It was just, and at a regular Shabbos meal, he could have like a couple of Jews from here, Yerushalayim Yidden who were here collecting in gold bekishes. He could have, they became very famous later. His name was Bruce Teitelbaum and Sari Kassira. They got married. One worked for Giuliani, I think, and one for Cuomo. It was like politically, and they got married, and they were at that table a lot. There was just all kinds of people. A lot were religious, a lot were not religious. The book on my grandfather, Rabbi of 84th Street, wasn't like today's biographies. It was sort of unauthorized, you might want to say, in the sense that he wanted to write this book. My grandfather okayed it. My grandmother, she should be gesundheitstark a little less, but I guess she was overruled. Was at the time a conservative Jew, just so taken by my grandfather, and he wanted to tell that story. And then there were just people who needed meals, like regular Yiddish old-time guests, people who are hungry emotionally, hungry spiritually, or hungry. And it was just, you could sit there and just listen to people talk. And my grandfather would kind of run this conversation. There was one conversation going on at a time at that table, not two. And he was the center of it. So he was just kind of navigating these conversations going around. People will tell me the Chachamim, we were talking about the Parsha, and it could be in, Yiddish, English, Hebrew, Polish, German. He was fluent in those 5 languages. So I don't think they spoke Polish or German at the table, but Yiddish, Hebrew, English was regular. And again, it was like I told you earlier, it was like being in FAO Schwartz, just of ideas. And my father's Allseingesund picked up a lot of that. And as a kid, we'd play games in the car. I'm an only son. I have 5 sisters, and I'm a Ben Yachid. So it was usually me and my father hanging out. So he would challenge me to, he'd tell me the name of a gadol. I had to tell him what sefer that gadol wrote, or where did they live. So I was a little kid, he would say who lived in Radin, right? Or who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Chozeh of Lublin. And then as I got older, and it became like something, it became I think the idea was that in yeshiva you're learning Torah, or in general studies you're learning math or science, and then there's a whole other untalked about in the schools, not talked about, which is the spirit of Torah, knowing who these people are, where they lived, and it's not discussed enough how much that connects you to Torah. That means, I don't come to your ankles in terms of knowledge, but for you, when you learn Orishan, so you really know who the Rishonim were. You really know where they lived. You don't have to do like I do when I read in Taisus with trying to mouth out the name of the city. So I can know, excuse me. You know, and you can visualize it. Excuse me. You know, and you can visualize it in your mind's eye. I see how you're smiling. You know what kind of clothing they wore. You could see it. So you connect to the Chofetz Chaim much better when you know a little more about the Chofetz Chaim. So I was raised, I guess, with that understanding. Like, let's make this as rich as possible. Let's make Yiddishkeit as rich as possible. So I guess to answer your first question, yeah. So to answer your question, like who I am, the thing that pertains to this conversation is I grew up with a love of Gedolei Yisrael, of great figures in Jewish history, of great people in Jewish history, and an expectation, I guess, to know who they were, to have an understanding, and it was like you're like out to lunch if you don't know where the Chassam Sofer lived, right? Like that's because part of the conversation, if you're saying the Chassam Sofer's Torah, is a basic understanding of what this man meant.
And something that always attracted me to Jewish history, especially like you're saying, I understanding who the Rishonim are, who the Achronim are, who we're reading, with their context, who the rebbeim were. I mean, in many cases, it's very important to know: is there machlokes? Are they arguing? Is the Torah being masked his father the Rush, or is he arguing on it? Right? What's going on? We need to know this. Who, the Rambam, and is he arguing on the Rimigash or the Rif? Like sometimes it's mamish negela ma'aseh halacha, but it's also it means something when we see who they were in their context. Yeah,
like you're saying, someone told I was at an event and they had this Hasidic Shabbat there. And I didn't find everything he said very funny, but he did say something that resonated with me. He was saying a joke, how this Hasidic Malamed got a job in a Litvish cheder. Because a lot of Litvish cheder, they're more warm. It's a fairly common thing. So they told him, after a month, you're doing a great job, but you're saying all your stories are Hasidic Maisis, and the kids are not exposed to that. So we need you to, kind of upgrade your repertoire of stories to be more Litvish. So he said, but I only know Hasidic stories. That's what I know. They said, okay, so here's what we're going to do. Say the same stories, because they're great stories. So they can just put in Litvish names into the same stories, if you don't mind. So he said, yeah, I could do that. They gave him the basic roster of who's who in Lithuanian history, and he's ready to go. So the kid comes home one day, Shabbos. He says, the Rebbe told us a story this week. He tells his father. His father says, what? He says, the Rebbe said that Baruch Ber of Kamenetz said that his neshama came down to this world to be Masakin eating gala on Shabbos. That was what the Barkan said. He was like, what happens if you're going to mix worlds and try to just... it's not the same thing. Baruch Ber didn't say that, right? And it's laughable but we do that all the time. That means here it's an extreme example of it. But, we'll just use Kotzk for example. I realized a couple of years ago that anytime there was a story with a gadol, it was like a sharp line. So there are these Kotzker substituting names. So we'll go to the Kotzker, Ufos Grading, or Satmarav of Huntner, Beis Yisrael, interchangeable, right? But if it's a nice story, then we're going to go over Rabbi Levine, Rabbi Shlomo Zalman, right? We have our teams and we decide. And if it's like a very, a lot of pikchas or wisdom, we'll say Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, and interchangeable with him, other people, right? And people just ran with that. And then there's the great global of Lubavitch Rebbe of Nachman Breslover, which is anything that fits on a fridge magnet. You diminish these people into quotable, pretty things that fit with nice. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going off in a direction.
No, why? This is very good. I think you're right. And that's why. Listen, personally, this is something that I got, from this. I don't mean to say, talk about, we're talking here about the biography of Kotzk. We'll get more into it. Like academic biographies, talking about biographies, like source-based biographies. This is why I think sources are so important, and I learned this over time, because you hear people saying quotes, and suddenly you hear the same quote, like you're saying, from right to left, different kufas. Like, wait, what's going on? Who is this quote really from? Where did you get this quote from? I don't know. I read it in a book. I saw it somewhere in a magazine, whatever. And you don't know where it's coming from. You have no idea what's true, what's not true. And like you're saying, talk about the Kotzker, every sharfa emes dig a line, or you talk about, oh, that's the Kotzker.
Somebody
the Kotzker
said
that
must
line.
Have been the Kotzker.
Right, it must have been. And then suddenly you're hearing it from someone else, and it's like, well, what's going on over here? Right. So, yeah, I think Jewish history is something that drew me to that, and something like that. So yeah, let's backtrack a little bit. So from here, I see your interest in history. But how did you become a writer? I think many listeners probably are familiar with your writing in Mishpacha, and you're writing all your different books, and you've written a lot about many different things. I mean, obviously you write a lot of biographies now, but you've written other things besides that. So how did you become a writer generally, and how did you get involved in like the biography game? Let's call it writing biographies, because I don't know if you have a number of how many you've written at this point.
Writing, okay, so again, a lot goes back to both my grandfather and my grandfather wrote in Das Yiddish regularly, which was a Yiddish periodical, and it was painful again for me to read it. I didn't speak Yiddish, but I would try to read it, and a lot of vavs and ayins, and again having to articulate the word out loud to try to know what he was saying. But he was a man of letters, and he it was very important to him. His world was Poland, and the interwar period in Poland was very important for people to know about, and again to know about the Gedalim and the yeshivas and the people. To me, I have to make a side mention and shout out to David Safir's article just now in the Sukkos Mishpacha about Radomsk. To me, it touched me very deep because that was my grandfather's Hasidus, and he always felt that the Chesed Torah network of yeshivas, the Radomsk Rebbe's blood, sweat, and tears went into that network to do that, was not appreciated, and everybody was killed, Rahman al-Islam. So there was no one to tell that story. So it meant so much to me. What my grandfather would have said had he read David's article. So he would write a lot. And my father also. My father's a very far better writer than I am, in multiple languages, to the point that till today, people send the wedding invitation. So there's a return card. So most people don't send a return card. They wait till, at least me, 2 days before that someone texts you, are you coming or not? And they say, ooh, okay, yes or no, right? My father writes notes, and people save them. I get this from people all the time. They're just his mazel tov brachas. Nothing to do with anything else. They hold on to it, and they keep it because of the way he's able to articulate things. Biksav. So I guess there's like a DNA component to writing. And then, like many good American kids, I went to camp, and color war and theme songs, and that brings out a certain. I think in camp, I went to Camp Monk my whole life. I think in camp is where I first have realized that I can make people cry or feel or smile with not me. That there's a power in words that the Rebbeim Shalom put into words, that if they're constructed or crafted well enough, they could really have an effect on people. So it's sort of music or art. You can really move people. So it was like a power that I found very interesting. And again, Pirchei, just the regular extracurricular yeshivish stuff. I was always looking to write. When I was just a funny thing, I was a bacher here in BMG, and I would be writing cards to people to their collars all the time. It's the weirdest thing in the world. I know people would come to me like, it's my collars birthday. No one knew anything then, and there was no texting in those days. There was no emails. Everything was a pen and a card. And so I was trying to say, like, I feel so blessed that I met you. I was like, what did I say? I didn't know him. I didn't know his collar. But I try to help people because nobody could formulate a sentence. Went to, got married, went back to Eretz Yisrael, came back to Montreal to learn a Kail there. My rebbe was open in Kail. I moved back, and I needed, what's the word? Money. Yeah, that's it. I was in Kail. I was a couple of years in. It was tight. So a friend of mine told me that Rabbi Lipschitz and Yated had these community pages. So maybe you want to do a page for Montreal. So it was $100, I think, $150 a column. It was every week. It was $400 or $500 a month. It made a big difference. So I started to do that, but it wasn't really as literary. It was more like taking a camera to Avos Rabbanim type of things. But he taught me a lot, Rabbi Lipschitz. Like I became very close to him. He was like my first mentor in the industry. He taught me a lot, and what I learned from him then it was the great I don't know what the word is, the great battles, because they weren't really battles, but the turmoil of 20 years ago was Mitzitza B'Peh and then Rubashkin. And he taught me to write with conviction. He taught me, if you have a position, like, I grew up in a family of diplomats, and it was very important to be liked. It's still important to be liked, but it's much more important to be taken seriously. And when you have an opinion, to stand by your opinion, and people won't like you less if you stand by your opinions. It's okay if you like decaf coffee and I like caffeinated coffee. I don't have to disagree with you. And he taught me how to he stuck his neck out there, and he took positions that were unpopular. There were a couple of other ones also along the way. And people would write and go, and it was the early days of the internet, and I was fascinated by that. Like, people were coming out and saying things. There was the early days of blogs, and I really read a lot and would follow a lot. And I'd be like, don't you care that they're saying this? And I guess he cared because he's a human being and people are sensitive. But he made peace with the fact that if I'm going to say things that make a difference, it's only in Shemayim they know who won these battles. Rubashkin's home, Baruch Hashem, Mitzitza B'Peh is not a story. But he was definitely, he doesn't need credit. He deserves credit for being one of the first people in From Media, when other people in From Media, and I was friends with a lot of them, was scared to say anything because it wasn't a thing that people did then. Today, because of the internet, people put their opinions out there and they learned how to do this. So he was my first mentor, I think, in really learning how to have an opinion and again, respecting your own opinions enough to take it all the way, follow through with it. From then, I went to Mishpacha. Mishpacha opened up, and I was a rabbi at that time. I had left Kyle, but I saw opportunity there, financial opportunity. Really, I wasn't looking to write to make a difference or to save the world or inspire people, although it's all nice byproducts. I was really looking to feed my family, which is also holy, also a mitzvah, and the magazine, and my grandfather's still alive. So as a rabbi, I was off for 2 months in the summer. We'd go to Muncie to my in-laws, even though I live in Montreal. So I'd go visit my grandfather as much as I could. And my wife, she should be benched, always encouraged me. We had little kids, and she'd always say, just go to the west side. He was already waning, my grandfather. He wasn't feeling great. He didn't leave the house that much anymore. So it was win-win. He was happy to talk in those years already. He wasn't as active as he had once been, and I was thrilled to listen. So I would write them down. So I would turn them into who we talk. I would go every day. I would say a name, the Bluzhov Rebbe, the Miramis, Rebbe Chanan Wasserman. I would tell him any of those kind of figures, he could go. Because he if he didn't know the person personally, he knew so many talmidim or so many people in the circle. So I was typing them up, and I went to Mishpacha. I said, do you want to print my article? And that was real money. I think it was $400 or $300 an article. That was like already big money for me. And so I started to do these things at Mishpacha. One of those articles was on Shlomo Freifeld. It was Sukkot, it was his yard site, and the editor then, Mrs. Safran, Fagel Safran, said, would you want to write on Shlomo Freifeld? I knew very little about him, but I was very taken by him. I had people in Madeira who Yitzi Halpin was his grandson, and I had a friend, his name was David Gottman. He's not alive anymore, but he was very special Bacher in Madeira, David Gottman, and he learned Bechavus with Rabbi Marshal Freifeld, Shlomo's son. So he would tell me a lot about, so I was very taken by it. I was excited to write about him. And I threw myself into that story, and it really captured me. It was the kind of article, I probably put 60, 70 hours in that article. I would talk to, well over my word count, I was still calling people. I didn't care. I wanted to know for myself. The article came out Sukkot, and it was well received. One of the people who read it was Benji Brasher. So I was like, he was a Talmud of Shlomo, and he called me up to write a book on Shlomo. And he was relentless. He is that type of person. He wants something, and I was a rabbi. And I wasn't holding by leaving being a rabbi, but he just kept calling to a book. At the end of my second year of teaching, I was looking for a change already. I felt there was an instability in the Ma'aseh. And again, finances were, my family was growing. And I said, hey, the amount he's ready to pay me to do a book is more than I'm making as a rabbi, by slightly more. And I can go back to Kyle half a day, and I could write. And I was like, hey, I would like that. It sounded something, so again, I had to sit with my own rebbeim and make that decision if it was the right thing to do. And I wrote the book on Shlomo, which I don't know if I should say this or not, but it's still my favorite book. We're Baruch Hashem, a lot of books later. It was something very special about it. And it taught me, Shlomo Freifeld was nifta in 1992, 93. The book didn't come out till 2007. And conventional thinking was that no one's going to buy the book, because even at the time when he passed away, when he was nifta, there were maybe 30 guys in Charyashev. No, really, it was a small yeshiva, and the yeshiva had gone, had gone through a couple of revolutions after his patira. So who's going to buy it? The community of Charyashev. No one's going to care about it. And the success of the book is not due to me and to being a great writer. It's that the world was ready for Shlomo's message. In 1992, they weren't ready yet for that message of whatever you'll say that message was, seeing the greatness in people. 2007, oh boy, was the world needing that message. So let the Rebbe Shalom do his thing, you do yours, and every message comes out when it has to come out, and you could put a message in the bottle and throw it into the water and see what happens. That book is being reprinted constantly. It's never out of print, Shlomo. I don't know what number printing they're in anymore. And it's not my book. I never wrote a book that was mine. That means I'm not a copyright holder on any book. I never got paid from sales of a book. So when I push a book or don't push a book, people make fun of me. Maybe people will sometimes stop me and say, I bought your book. And I'm like, oh, thank you. I'm going to buy a filter fish to Shabbos. I'm so grateful to you. They gave me $1.25 kilo. I don't really know what to say. I appreciate it.
Well, also in general, I think a lot of writers, you are supporting writers, but they don't make that much money, and a lot of them exactly. You're not the copyright holder. It's not your book, and you're really a gun for hire, for lack of a better word. Meaning people like you said already there. I was going to ask you this. How do you pick what topic to choose? Well, people come to you and they say, listen, I want you to do this topic. I mean, I imagine, you can confirm this, that there are projects you've turned down because you're not interested in writing about that topic. I mean, I would assume so. Is that true? But
it's a very weird. It's for sure true. Baruch Hashem. I don't want to get out here and say I choose my projects. Not always like that. There are times that I'm available, and there's nobody looking, and there's times that I'm not available, and there's lineups of people. There's Baruch Hashem. There's no shortage. But again, I don't want to make it like it's more than it is and make it sound as if that there's people knocking down my door. Baruch Hashem, there's interest, there's people, but I can't explain why I choose a book, because it's really been a shemayim, and I know that this is true because there's books I said I don't feel a connection to that person, I don't want to do it, and then a year later the person tried again, and I was like, yeah, I really do want to do it. And an example of that is Kotzk, which was again also one of the most, in terms of commercial success. It's one of the most successful books. You could say that it created maybe a movement. I don't think too many people heard of him before the book. I wish
the Mouse Rebbe before.
I wish the listeners could see. I thought the Mouse Rebbe. That's what I thought.
Everybody thought.
And the one who wanted the book, his name was Rebbeim Reuben. He's Anikel, and he was also relentless. And I was a Muncie once, and came. Where's the Chasna? And he came. You have to have Yisroel Besser. And so I did like a Google search, and nothing. There was nothing there that spoke to me. And from Himmel, they wanted this book out. I don't know that it needed to be me. And again, he caught me one day, and it probably was for financial reasons. Like, it was a time period when I needed a book or was looking to do that type of book. So I took it, and I fell in love with it. I started to read the Lashon Kodesh stuff, the Yiddish stuff. I pushed through. I went to Kotzk. Montreal is a very old Hungarian city, and there was still Yidden. When I started the book, there was still Yidden alive who remembered Kotzk. So I would sit with them, and I was like, oh, okay, this is real, this is legit, and I did that book. Again, I try to let myself be open to every idea, because the Rebbeinu Shalom was ultimately the one. But there are definitely subjects that I connect to instantly, and subjects that I know I won't do a good job. I also won't do a good job. I never did a book on. I loved Abnazin Tzvi like a father. I learned by him. I was close to him. I didn't want to do that book, and that one punkt was offered. The other ones weren't even offered to me. These. Because that's not what I don't think that's my. I like to have David Trank, who people didn't really hear of outside of his thing. That's much more stimulating.
I know him from Lakewood. I remember him
a little bit, but let's be honest. If I would have told you a book, you would have said, "Yeah, he was a loud guy, right? Jumped up and down by."
That's exactly how I knew him.
Yeah, that's not a book, right? I knew him from Kamak, but I like the thrill of constructing a story that nobody knows, and telling it my way. And with the Gedalim, I don't mean that he wasn't a gadol, but I mean with the formal sukkah decoration gedalim.
Yes,
you're not getting Chacham Ovadia, those kind of books. Again, they never really came my way. There needs to be an element for me of discovery, of mystery, of mystique.
No, listen, on a different level, I do a podcast more than writing at this point, and the same type of thing. People come to me all the times, now especially all the time. Can you please record a podcast on this, podcast on that? And some of them I just don't have interest. Now, sometimes I'll do it for whatever reason, and decide eventually I'll do it. And sometimes I don't do as good of a job in the interview. It's not something I'm all that familiar with. I'm not that into it. It's the same type of thing. But sometimes I'll come back, 6 months later, a year later, 2 years later. Oh, now I am into that topic. Now I am going to do that topic. Or sometimes not. It just depends. And yeah, I have the same thing. I'm always curious. Listeners can confirm or not, and let me know on this. If to me there's a certain thrill, like you said, there's an interest of bringing to listeners or readers information about a gadol, about a talmid chacham, about a person that they never knew of. They never knew the story. Here, learn about this story. There's an interest. I have that. There's a thrill in that. Or is it, no, tell me about gadol or person X that I thought I knew about, but now tell me the other story. I never know what's more interesting. To me, it's the former rather than the latter. But I'm curious from the listeners. I'm always curious. I'm always, when I post an episode like that, the different types, I'm always looking at the stats. Like, what's going to be more listened to? What's going to be more popular? Because I don't know. Do you want to hear about? So I don't know. Maybe I don't know what it has with writing. I think with a podcast, sometimes with the former, people are like, oh, they see the headline, they see the title, and they're like, I don't know what it is. I'm not listening to that. And sometimes they see someone they know, but I want to hear more about whoever. It's probably writing such a thing like that, something like that comes out.
I feel like there needs to be a mix a little bit in the sense that they, at least what I look for, that they should be mildly familiar that this person exists. Yeah. Like, they shouldn't think I made it up, but want to know more. And there are plenty of figures like that who are, and there's people I would want to write about for that reason. And another thing, which is, so you just mentioned it, and I had forgotten to say this, but it's so important. If you don't feel passionate about it, then it's not going to be a bad episode, and it'll be a bad book. So we just pick that up in a second. Even if you'll get all the information and you'll really work hard and you'll do thorough research, the intangible of writing and of podcasting too is the emotional component that you put into it.
For sure. So I have it a little easier because even if I'm a little not so interested in a little flat, the guest could be super animated and interested in it, so then the episode's good anyways. But if I'm animated into it, I think the listener, and I've gotten this feedback, like, well, Naki, you were really into that episode. You mamish, not only knew it, but you were into it. You were asking the great questions, and you the listener can hear the enthusiasm, as opposed to when I'm just like, yeah, tell me about this, tell me about that. But sometimes that's how it is. Sometimes I'm just not. Someone asked me about it or decided to do it. I'm also trying to vary the podcast and have the podcast be balanced. So for me, I like the balance, and I think that's something on this podcast, whether I'm interviewing an academic or just an author or Machaber Sefer or different kufas, different time periods, whether it's Ashkenaz or German, or Spain or Rishonim or Achronim or Hungary or Hasidim or whatever, trying to balance everything out. Or doing an episode on Kotzk or something like that, trying to balance out the podcast. So let's really ask, why Kotzk? How did you get to? Is that just someone approached you and said, "Hey, write a book on Kotzk," or there was a connection to Kotzk more than that?
Yeah. So Kotzk, like this, there's a few parts to that answer. One is, like I mentioned, my grandfather was from Poland. I went back with him to Poland, and Kotzk Chassidus was the breeding ground for so many other Chassiduses. Obviously, Ger, Sachachev, Vorka, which is Amshinov. That means so many of the great Polish dynasties were spawned by Kotzk. And more than that, Kotzk was, I wouldn't say the only Chassidus, but it's a Chassidus that you say the word Kotzk, people knew exactly what the Kotzk Rebbe was trying to develop and trying to build. So Kotzk was a Chassidus that the entire Polish Chassidish world was beholden in a certain sense to Kotzk. The Polish Chassidus were extremely important to them, learning Torah Nigla. The Radomsker Rebbe was not a Kotzk Yerush heir, but in his yeshiva, the primacy of learning Torah, Gemara, Rashi, Taisus, Rashba, Ksais was everything. Kotzk Rebbe brought that back to Chassidus. So obviously, growing with my grandfather, Kotzk Rebbe. Number two was that I had done the book on the Beis Yisrael last year, the Ger Rebbe, and when I did the Beis Yisrael was considered to be a Kotzker. He was the one who brought Kotzk back into Ger. The sharpness, but to say sharpkeit and sharpness is really diminishing and minimizing it, because it was so much more than that. It was this probing, penetrating, relentless demand to ask a person, why am I doing what I'm doing now? To really live with the consciousness of what you'd call in today's parlance being real. So I was fascinated by Kotzk from the Beis Yisrael. The Rebbe Shalom sent me at that moment, the sponsor of the dedicator, whatever word he'll use for this thing. He lives in LA. He's a good friend of mine. We learn on the phone now. Kotzk Tire. His name is Truman Sachs, young fellow, a Kotzk Anikel. Then there's Menachem Mendel. His English name is Truman because Truman. That's why his parents named him that. His father's Rabbi David Sachs in LA, and he wanted a book on Kotzk, and he had read other stuff I wrote. And he went to art school, and it was really, like I said, the Rebbe Shalom's son's shidduchim, and Rabbi Zlotowitz from art school, he's one of the masters at knowing which writers write for which project. He's sometimes tells me this is really not for you, and sometimes he says this really is for you. Both ways, he's been right. Rabbi Trank, he forced me into. He didn't ask me. I wasn't sure it was a book, and he, Gedalia just jammed me into it, and after an hour I was hooked, and I never looked back. But that was really his doing. So he said, "Oh, that sounds like it's good for Israeli Kotzk," and I met with him, and I met with the writer, with the sponsor, and more or less we a framework of what kind of book. The finances are really the least important part of this meeting. It's like finances are the finances. It's necessary. I have a family to feed, but much more important to me is, what vision do you have for the book? What's the story you think this book has to tell? What are you looking for from a writer? Because if you're looking for me to tell your story, I can't do that. I have to tell my story, and we could discuss it, but that's very important to me. Art school, has, again, their vision for what it should be. So once we were all on the same page, I spoke to Rabbi Sherman, then till Zayin Gesund, and we did the timeline, 12 to 18 months from beginning to end, and I threw myself into it. But the 12 to 18 months that it took me to do it is not really fair, because I've been working on this for years, because I did the Beis Yisrael, before that, and I grew up where I grew up, imbibing this stuff. I don't even like the word stuff. Imbibing this.
Yeah, the story in the Kotzker. So let's turn to Kotzk. You said Menachem Mendel, the Kotzker Rebbe, Listeners are somewhat familiar, and I'm sure everybody, when people saw the book and I put it out, there was a lot of excitement on Twitter and on WhatsApp when I put it out there. But right away, everybody's like, the last years. Okay, we'll get to that. That's it. But first of all, there's a lot more to Kotzk than just the last years, right? There, of course. So let's talk about Kotzk. For those that aren't familiar with the Kotzker. And I also do want to get to what you said you had a plan. So what is the book? What's the book trying to do? Is it a standard biography? Is it a biography and Torah? Is it a mix? But we'll get there. Let's talk about the biography of the Kotzker. And let's tell the listeners, for those that know or those that don't know.
Okay, so you asked 3 different questions. So we're
starting
with
the
last one?
Yes, with the last question. I know, I did too much there.
What's the short biography of the Kotzker Rebbe?
Yes, correct.
Kotzker Rebbe grew up in the glory era, the early years of Hasidus. There was the founder of Hasidus, the Baal Shem Tov. His Talmud was the Mizrich Maggid. The Maggid of Mizrich did something that the Baal Shem Tov didn't do. The Baal Shem Tov had this vision of Hasidus, but he passed it along, on the back of the wagon. That's how he was doing it. In the forest, there was no framework of Hasidic thought. There was just the Rebbe saying ideas. The Mizrich Maggid was the great organizer of Hasidus, and out of his court came forth the Baal Tanya, Reb Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, Reb Shmelka, and the Hafla and his brother Dafla, right? All the great rabbis, the Reb Melech and the Reb Zisha, and he suddenly Hasidus started to spread well beyond, it was going right Ukraine and Poland and eventually Hungary, and he really created, like I said, he reorganized Hasidus, and it took off. The next generation of Hasidus was the Chozeh of Lublin. The Chozeh brought Hasidus to the masses. He was, what the Rebbes of today would look to emulate, I guess, in a certain sense. He had this big base medrash, and it was Hasidus. Everyone was welcome, and people were coming in, and the Chozeh was the Chozeh, the seer, because he saw from one end of the world to the other, and his lips were always moving, and he was in the heavens, and people knew that they were doing him a kfittel, and he saw the Shayrish and Neshama, and he was able to say things at the same time. It was normal for someone to come and say, Rebbe, my cow isn't giving milk, and it was Hasidus for the masses, and there was a lot of the festivity, the things that make Lithuanians until this very day nervous about Hasidim, people sitting around the table making tikkun and dancing and drinking and l'chaim, the frivolousness or that culture. There was that. There were tremendous avodah, tremendous balei avodah. Again, you talk about Hasidim of the Chozeh. So the Kotzk Rebbe was a child at the time of the Chozeh. And he grew up in a Vilna Gaon leaning home. That means even though his father's father-in-law, his great-grandfather, David Halpern, was from the intimates of the Baal Shem Tov, not a secret. Really he moved from one city to another out of respect for the Baal Shem Tov. He was a real talmid of the Baal Shem Tov. His father, Blebish, was the different accounts. I read a lot on Kotzk. Some people say he was learned. Some people say he was very simple. He was poor. The Pinkas of the Chevra Kedisha has, and his Matzeva indicates that he was a chash of a person. Gaber the Chevra Kedisha, whether or not he was wealthy, I don't know, but he was certainly learned, and he was a great admirer and even an adherent of the Vilna Gaon, of the Vilna Gaon's way. The Kotzker Rebbe was his second son, and he was a strange child always. He was a loner. That's, again, the Schwarze Mendel. They called him Black Mendel. Later, it was because he had a black beard, but he was also very somber and serious. No flattery, no tolerance. He wasn't a backslapper. He was a loner, didn't have a lot of friends. Learned a lot, and burning with this passion. He would be alone outside the city singing "Leave You, Sorry, Iran." He wanted something more. He was very uncomfortable on this world. He really, really was looking to, and he got married. Either at 14, at 16, at 20, depending on who you believe, or better, on who you don't believe. And at 20, he moved to Tamashav, where his father-in-law lived. And he was going to follow that line of a lot of the people think they got married, they were supported, and they learned, they became Rabbanim, I think. But he was restless, that he was, according to most accounts, the Chozeh knew about this neshama, and he sent someone to proselytize and bring the Kotzker Rebbe back to Lublin. He wanted him by him. The Chozeh was in the shul. This person spent a few days in the shul, and he was watching him. The Kotzker Rebbe, and he noticed that by day he learned, but when there were people around. But at night, when the shul was quiet, he really learned with all his intensity and all his passion and all his energy. He realized that this man was on a track to become something big. And he started to talk to him. Later, the Kotzker Rebbe, who was not a shmoozer, told his Hasidim that it was unusual that he engaged in conversation and listened to somebody, but he said he knew how to talk and I knew how to listen. He knew how to tell and I knew how to hear. So he told him that in Lublin, there's a Yid who's creating a path to the Rebbeim Shalom, a path of truth, path of feeling, a path of meaning. It sounded attractive, so he went to Kotzk. He went to Lublin. He became a tremendous admirer of the Chozeh. This is well known that he bought a pocket knife on the way to Lublin. He needed a pocket knife. I think the way I imagine it is you could probably use it to eat the cut bread and to sew a button on. It was probably like a very useful. It was like an iPhone of today. Was a pocket knife, and he came in. The Chozeh said to him, "I'm sure you didn't come just to buy a pocket knife." To which he answered with Ruach HaKodesh, "You're not going to buy me." That means I'm not impressed by. He was already announcing and proclaiming his view of Hasidim. I'm not here to see wonders. That doesn't. You're not going to do anything with that. It means the Chozeh. Other people say, "Oh my God!" Right? As you know that I'm here, didn't do much for him. They went back and forth a few times. The Chozeh told him that his path is going to lead to Marash Chayro, to depression, to gloom. He said, "But it's my path, and if it's my path, why should I care what you're saying?" Right? Because again, that was a bedrock of Kotzk thought: is that you can't imitate people. You can only imitate people if you don't believe that you have an individual path, which is kfira, because the Rebbe made you, and you have to follow your path. He would talk with, I guess, remorse at the end of his life that he didn't get to know the Chozeh better. He told the Parashamashava, his confidant, at the end of his life, the Kotzk Rebbe, "I knew the Beis Medrash in Lublin, but I never got to know the Rebbe in Lublin." He felt bad about that. Going on?
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, keep going.
In Lublin, like I said, it was a massive factory of all kinds of different levels of ideas. So you had people doing tikkun chatzais, and people dancing, and people coming with milk cows, and people sleeping on the benches, and people collecting money, and people who knew Kol Torah Kula and were looking for Gilelio. Everybody was at home in the Chozeh, and he had room in his neshama for everybody. And another fundamental of Chassidus is that the needs of another Jew is the most important thing in the world. So if this guy's coming in for a bracha for his milk cow, then that becomes my ruchnius, and that's as important to me as rebuilding a brick in the Beis Hamikdash right now, right? That becomes everything. So there were Hasidim who were looking for more, so he appointed, so to speak, like a Reish Chabura over them, the Chozeh, which was the Yid HaKadosh, Yaakov Yitzchak Pshescha, who was a big Talmid Chacham, and from his group, his Chabur, he demanded, these were people who came to Lublin in search of Avodah. He was relentless. He taught them, again, first of all, Nigla, Iyun, Gemara was Yid HaKadosh's, was very, very important to them. And there was a certain way that they mocked a little bit, the way everybody just like talked about the Rebbe a whole day. What are you? Your Yiddish can't just be saying stories over the man inside. There has to be substance to it. Now, again, it's hard to sit here and say, because these were all people of substance. I'm sure they weren't doing nothing. But you can understand just from looking at Chassidus today what became important to other people. See, the Yid HaKadosh already he was a little bit maybe a renegade to that way. And as always, there were people looking to create dissent. He was called the Yid HaKadosh, the Holy Jew. A lot of reasons said, but the simple reason is he had the same name as the Rebbe. His name was Yaakov Yitzchak Rabinovich. The Chozeh's name was Yaakov Yitzchak. So in Shulchan Aruch, it's Kapaskin that you can't call somebody who has the same name as your Rebbe, so they called him the Yid. Others say that it was because every day he was a bigger Yid than the day before. It became more Yid. Others say everyone has their tayus in it. But others say because there was a machlokes, they didn't want to say his name. That they weren't comfortable calling him by his name. They just called him the Jew from Pshescha because they wouldn't refer to him by his name. He who shall not be named. So Yid HaKadosh had this chabura, and he really found a certain degree of happiness. The Kotzk Rebbe will talk about that as his happiest years. He sat over there, he learned Torah, he had a Rebbe, they learned Nigla, which meant a lot to him, and there was this demand to grow, and Yid HaKadosh would say things like, when Mashiach comes, the Rebbes are going to come to greet him with their Hasidim, he's going to tell them, get out of here, he's going to tell this wasn't real, and the Hasidim will say, what did we do wrong? So he said, if you would have davened for truth, then you would not have been led astray by this, meaning you would have found truth. He demanded a certain, the Chassidim, it's not enough to say we follow a big tzaddik. You have to have a derech that you're producing and contributing. Again, it's hard for someone like me to sit over here. I'm thinking about what I'm going to eat from Lav Malka, to try to sit here and think I understand the differences in how they viewed Chassidus. But that's what was going on. That was his happy time. The Yid HaKadosh was nefta. In the Chabur of the Yid HaKadosh, and this is important, the Kotzker was still, an outcast. He wasn't an outcast, that's not the right word, but he was still a loner. He was still unique. He was, the Schwarzer Mandel, the nickname pursued by when the Yiddish Kaddish was already so sick. His big nifta. So Chassidim were rising on him. They were crying and davening. But he didn't daven like that, the Kotzk Rebbe. He was stood there and his lips weren't even moving. And his subsequent Rebbe, the Rebbe Rabbeinu B'Pshischa, said to him, you're davening more than all of them, Mendel, in your way. He didn't believe in screaming and he thought that was dramatics. Tefillah was much more, had to come much more from an essence. And he believed, I think, that maybe that any external display of anything is on the cheshbon, it's got the cost. It diminishes the internal contribution to that same pursuit. So as much as the Chassidus, notably in Kalin and in Stalin, where they think that the Chassidus Meir Pneumius, like that says on Kadmainim, that you have to do that. Again, it's not for me to, but in Kotzk they felt, and then there was the great danger in everything in Kotzk that another person is seeing it and you just lost everything. That means if you're doing it to satisfy other people, anything that you're doing to be nice and to earn the admiration of other people is Avodah Zarah, because you're serving yourself. The Kotzk Rebbe taught, you're not serving God, you're serving yourself with trying to earn respect for that. So the Rebbe Rabbeinu B'Pshischa. So he was in the Chabur Yiddish Kaddish. The Rebbe Rabbeinu was himself a Chiddush to the Chassidim. I'm sure you know this. He was, I think the word is apothecary, right? They call him in the books. He was a pharmacist. You're familiar with the industry, Temerol, Bergson. They were the big industrialists they were the big supporters of Chassidim. They were the mix of Lezer Scheiner, Moshe Reichman, Shlomo Yehuda Rechnitz, Ralph Herzka of then, for the Chassidish world, was those people. Temerol Bergson and her husband. And they were big industrialists, and then later she had a bank. And she really saw it as an honor. Her husband, then he passed away, and she took it over, the wealthy Temerol, to support the Hasidim. She said she would give anything to wash the laundry of the Hasidim. She saw this, Chedushirim, they were taken by the Chedushirim because they lived in Warsaw, which is where he lived. But they would do anything for the Hasidic movement. So the Rebbe Rabbeinu worked for them. He was in business. And he traveled a lot to the fairs, Leipzig, Danzig, over there. And he met a lot of Maskilim on the way. Because his father came from Germany. And he we wore a short jacket. He dressed well. Because he had this German education, he learned in yeshiva, in real yeshiva. Learned in, those who said he learned by March Benet, I had a hard time substantiating that. But for sure, you would know this. He didn't learn by March Benet?
I'm not sure, man. I don't remember.
But he learned in yeshivas. He learned in real yeshivas for 10 years. He learned in yeshiva as a bacher before he got married. So he was a real Talmid Chacham. And he also, like I said, he also had this German culture, and he knew a lot. So he would engage the Maskilim in conversation, and he found that he was reaching them. He knew a lot. He would go to the theater. He played chess. And later, when he took over the Chassidus, this is a fundamental disagreement and understanding the evolution. The people would make fun of Pshischa, and they would say, what's the Rebbe teaching you? He's telling you over things he heard in the theater or that he heard in the fair? Like what type is he saying over? Lines from Shakespeare or from the fair? And the Rebbe would say, the Rebbe Rabbeinu knew this, and he said, who could better cure a patient? Someone who read about the illness or someone who has himself experienced the illness and learned? He said, I went out there into the trenches, so to speak. I got my hands dirty for this reason, so I can help. He had a very specific avodah, and he was very confident in this path. The Rebbe Rabbeinu took over the Chabur B'Pshischa, and he was known for his wisdom. The Rebbe Rabbeinu famously said that the whole Torah is there's only one mitzvah essay and one mitzvah slice essay. The mitzvah essay is Zayah Chacham, be smart. The mitzvah slice is Zaynish Kanar, don't be a fool. That you could confine the whole Torah or break it down to that. Don't be an idiot, as we would say today. And he everything he did was wise, and it found, but his snagdus, the opposition to this chabur, was tremendous. There were a few things they did differently than other people. One is they kind of changed the role of a rebbe and what it means, and this absolute rule where we just talk about what the rebbe does a whole day. They also they like I said, because it was the kavod, the respect for talmidei chachamim had gone down, because the Baal Shem Tov built this movement where the masses are holy, and he saved Klal Yisrael with it. There's no question about it, that the people, the wagon drivers and the water carriers felt disenfranchised. They're not talmidei chachamim, and they realized Shabbat Tzvi's success was because he was able to prey on people's emunah pshuta and get them over to that, but they didn't have that much else. So the Baal Shem Tov kind of brought back the people, but it came at the risk of talmidei chachamim, because what it said is, being a talmid chacham is enough. You have to have a connection to Hashem. The small actions you do, right? the holiness of the Yid in the fear who says, "Ay, not to have mincha, the sun's going down." All that stuff came at a cost. So in Pshischa, they brought back that you have to be a Talmid Chacham. The rebbeim said a shir Ian every day. If you didn't ask questions about the shir, he didn't let you come back because he says, "I'm not here to teach you. I'm here to learn with you. Let's go. Let's engage in learning." That's what he wanted. And another thing was the Zman Tefillah, because they didn't do formal anything because it had to be real. So we know this from ourselves because we do daven 3 times a day because we're good boys, and we look at myzmanim.com and we make sure, and we know that our davening is empty because we're just formulaic little soldiers checking off the boxes to make sure that we don't burn in hell. But it's lacking. So he said that it can't go that way. That's not the tefillah that Hashem wants from us. So on his plates, on his shoulders, he took on this idea that hachana for davening is part of the tefillah, and that the Rebbeinu Shalom is happy when we put our essence, not when we sleep till 11 o'clock and then say, I was doing hachana for tefillah, but when someone is really engaged in sharpening his heart and mind to make him ready for this experience called tefillah, he taught that no tefillah should look the same. That means if you daven for the same amount, a lot of shuls have today, right? Baruch Hu, Psukei Zimra, Ting, Mincha, Kol Hashatz. It's a joke because that's not tefillah. It's it's like telling you, imagine what would your wife feel like if you said we were speaking 17 minutes every night on Makabel. This year, Shana, we don't see enough time, 17 minutes a night. But what if I need 18 minutes? Or what if I'm not in the mood of 17 minutes a night? I don't know. We're doing that effectively to Rebbeinu Shalom with this. Now again, there's reality and there's theory, and everybody has to figure out how to balance that. A lot of danger came out of people who only focused on the heart and decided that they know better than Shulchan Aruch, and I'm not here for that. So in Pshischa, they davened late. And the people already opposed Pshischa. Pshischa kind of mocked them. So there was a famous Chasna and Stila. There was the Rebbe, the Zkan member of the time was the Abder of the Ohev Yisrael. So his granddaughter was marrying the Einik of the Nashchiza, big rabbis, and everybody was coming. As they write in all this farm, 300 white Bekishes were coming. That was the way they described the grandeur, the splendor of that Chasna and Stila, and that would be a good time to take down Pshischa. So they planned to come, the opponents of Pshischa, mainly older talmidim of the Chozeh who still felt bad, feeling that the Yid Kaddish had rebelled against the Chozeh, decided they're going to go to the Chasna, the wedding in Astilla, and they're going to take down. Famously, rebbeim said he's going to go himself. The talmidim didn't want him to go. They thought it was beneath his dignity. So the Kotzker, Mendel, said, if the Rebbe goes, I'm going. And he didn't want the Kotzker to go because the Kotzker could burn them with his mouth. I don't think the Kotzker's thing was PR. So he didn't want to send him. So the Shirim went with others. And they won over the Abder in a minute with the Torah. He looked at their kvittelach. He said, I'm not taking any more kvittelach today. I just got Baal Shamska kvittelach. That means the caliber of the purity of what he saw. And after that, Pshischa was accepted. When the Rebbe Rabbeinu was nifta, then there was a crossroads in this whole idea of Pshischa Chasidus. Because there were some who liked their Mendel, but they said he's not a Rebbe. He's a firebrand. He's not Amami. He's not going to socialize with us. He doesn't really have a heart for the common, for the ailing cow, or for even the single daughter, or even the fact that I don't have a penny, I have no panasa. The stuff that rabbis were busy with, he has no sympathy for us. Others were very drawn by his fire. They said, this is authentic Pshischa. Finally, it's Pshischa next level, Pshischa 2.0. It came down to him in the Chedush. And a lot of people hoped that the Chedush would come out as the Rebbe. And the Kotzk Rebbe was overheard saying, it's either me to you or you to me. That means one of us is going to get it, and the other one's going to. We're not both being rabbis. One of us will take it, and the other one will be subservient. And they were discussing, and they spent a whole night and a whole day talking. The Chedush came out and said, the Rebbe is coming for Mincha. And with that, he announced, the Rebbe, he said, our Rebbe is an Emesaid. That was like Chedush introduced to, and he let them know that and the Chedush said that, he spoke about this a lot later, that he said, I saw a fire and I bet myself before it. And he became a talmid of the Kotzk Rebbe after that. And Kotzk was born. At the same time, one of the Kotzk Rebbe's best friends didn't take him as a Rebbe. That was Rabbi Yitzchak Avarka, which is the founder of what's today Amshnov. And because he told the Kotzk Rebbe, you're not giving people what they need. He said, Avos Yisrael. So the Kotzk Rebbe said to me, Avos Yisrael means to take a Yid by his hair on a freezing day and pull him out of bed and scream Hashem Hu like him. That's Avos Yisrael, because I care about him. That means what you're giving them is Again, I'm saying my own Rishalom for this. He didn't say this, and I don't know if it's a good mashal, but if you see a homeless guy by 7-Eleven and you give him a $5 bill instead of a dollar bill, he's sitting there in the back, that's your brand of Avos Yisrael. You're allowing him to go on in living with no hope, and I'm pulling him up and rehabilitating him, right? Now you're going to lose a lot more people my way, the Kotzk Rebbe, so saying, but that's Avos Yisrael. So let's give everyone a chance, right? And the Vork Rebbe was saying, we're not here. We're here to help Eden. The whatever that dispute was, it's above me. But Kotzk Hasidus was from its outset an opposition to an opposition, because even within Pshuscha, it was extreme.
What happened with Ishbitz? I think we should mention, some of the talmidim. You already mentioned the Chedush Harim. We'll talk about his son-in-law, the Avnei Nezer, the Sachachover, and the Ishbitz was also there. So what happened with Ishbitz?
What happened with Ishbitz? You're jumping straight.
Jumping, that's it.
What happened with Ishbitz was a Talmud. The first 2 years, Kotzk Rebbe opened his Chasidus in Tamashav. That was his city where he lived. The Ishbitz was from Tamashav. So people would come to Kotzk. Kotzk did something also unique. They went to work by day. People joined. There was like this collective commune almost. And by day, they were bricklayers. They did odd jobs. Whoever went out to work, it wasn't all the same people every day, brought back some money, and they made a dinner with that. Ever money came in. And then the nights were Avaida. And the Ishbitzer he was Chozeh of Lublin, his name was. He was from Tamashav, and he was a couple of years younger than the Kotzker Rebbe, and he was very devoted to him. He set up this. He organized that the people should have where to sleep, and he really was one of the Rashi Chabur there in Kotzk. They were very close. Over the years, the Kotzker Rebbe, instead of becoming, as some people had hoped when he'd become Rebbe, including the Vorker Rebbe, that he'd become more tolerant of people's little things, he became less tolerant and much more focused on heaven and lifting people up. And he was very successful. He attracted, we'll go through it, we don't have the time for it now, but the sons of all the great Rebbes, the Tver Shleima, his son-in-law, B'chaskel of Kuzmir, the greatest Rebbes, including the Vorker Rebbe, the Yitzchak Vorker, who didn't go with Kotzk because he didn't agree with his way. His two sons, Mendel the Vorker, Mendel Shaskan, as he was known, and Yaakov David Ramshnov, were Kotzk Chassidim. That means he got the best. The ones, meaning you could even, this is my suggestion, those who were raised with privilege, wealthy, or yichus, needed Kotzk more than others because they were much more at risk of it was comfortable. You're going to be a rabbi anyhow. You're going to be rich anyhow. They needed Kotzk because those are the ones walking around with holes inside of them. So the Kotzk Rebbe he had the crowds coming to him, and as much as you would think he tried to chase them away, that's how much more popular he was. You know why? Again, this is just my own hypothesis, because people appreciate when you're honest with them. That means if somebody comes in, a big tzaddik came in, one of the Einikal Chadiyah Kaddish came in. He was a big rabbi later. And the Kotzk Rebbe said, "Who are you?" He said, "I'm an Einikal Chadiyah Kaddish, his rabbi." So if we're doing PR 101 PR for rabbis, you say, "Ooh, Einikal Chadiyah Kaddish, my rabbi, I have to stand up for you," right? Kotzk Rebbe said, "Oh, great, another son of a son. Another son of somebody's son, like a dunk, shkaich, another." Like he didn't, and that kind of thing attracted people to more because they said, "Hey, there's a real respect in demanding from me." That means when you tell somebody, again, this is me preaching, you're amazing. It doesn't really feel good past 5 seconds because you expect nothing from me. But when you say a son of somebody's son, what have you done? You're demanding from me. That's something that I could hear. So Kotzk was very successful Hasidus in that way. He became less and less tolerant of people talking about money. He didn't care about money at all. And he thought money, he really, bitachon, and it's hard to use words like Amunah bitachon when you understand the levels of Kotzk Amunah bitachon, the way they saw. The purpose of life is this relationship with the Ben Shalom, where if there's a fundamental vart to Kotzk, and there's a lot of Torah in this book, I try to couch it in the stories, it's that why is the Nachash cursed? That he has dust. There's dust everywhere. Kotzker Rebbe says it's like a parent tells a child, here's your allowance for the next 10 years. I don't want to see you again. Don't bother me. You have what you need. Bye. A loving parent says, can't wait to see you next Sunday. Here's what you need for this week, because the shaykhus, the connection is the main thing. And the Nachash is cursed because there's dust everywhere. Goodbye. We have nothing with each other. The connection with the Rebbeinu Shalom, the vulnerability and the holes that you have is what allow you to connect with God. Then that's the purpose. That's why you're here. So not having money is everything. Kotzker Rebbe, just I have to say this. Kotzker Rebbe, the Gemara says that it's a little known vart of Kotzk, which is that somebody who has no karkas pata from Eile Regel, the Gemara learns out in Masechtas Pesachim in the first parak, that somebody who has karkas mechayiv to be Eile Regel, and somebody who doesn't have karkas pata, with the whole taisus with Karban Pesach. Why? Why does someone? It's a mirakra, but what's the significance of somebody not having karka? So, you're a Talmid Chacham more than me. Meir Simcha says what he says about the sign of leaving your karka. Kotzker Rebbe says because the person doesn't have a roof over their head doesn't have to go to Yerushalayim to find God. He lives with God. If you don't know where you're sleeping tonight, God's your roof. Again, that was so he preached it was like revolutionary in terms of Gvirim got no respect, and they would take apart Gvirim and Kotzk. A guy could come in, they would take some money from him for l'chaim. It was important, they pay for the night, but for one night only. Like, okay, who's paying for supper tonight? And then they the clothing. Kotzk Rebbe famously said, I don't know what's if it was literal or not, that he wants 10 yidden with a cabbage leaf on their head and a gartel of straw to stand on the rooftop and scream at him like him. They walked around dressed differently. Kotzk Rebbe, in marked contrast to all the other rabbis you've ever seen, wore a yarmulke and tzitzis. He walked around the yarmulke and tzitzis. Now, the Novominsk Rebbe Shlita, I spoke to him quite a while. They're Kotzk. The late Novominsk Rebbe, Yaakov Perlow, was a real Kotzk. He was a Kotzk. His grandfather was the last Sokolov Rebbe, his mother's father, and he was Kotzk. There was a lot of Kotzk in him. If you heard him speak, and you heard, I don't know if you have friends who learned in Novominsk in the yeshiva, people who knew him, he was very honest and very demanding, and very nice. Like, it didn't come at the expense. I wouldn't say he was nice in the conventional way of lit up and gave lollipops to everybody. He was a very pleasant person, and he gave himself away to Klal Yisrael. The ultimate act of niceness is how much time you give other people. He gave himself away. Tremendous masmid. So the Novominsk Rebbe told me today that he doesn't think it's true. He thinks the Kotzk Rebbe did wear a hat. There are messiahs that the Rebbe did wear a hat. But for sure he walked around and, he didn't have hours like other Rebbes. He would come into the Beis Medrash at night. He would speak to people in learning. If he would overhear, he would say a line and go back inside and close the door. He ran it differently. Anyhow, Ishbitz. The Ishbitz Bat Yosef was one of his big chassidim. Towards the end of his life, the Kotzk Rebbe withdrew more and more from being able to be busy with what he saw as base questions and desires, and the Chassidus sort of ran itself because he said his things. He said they knew his ideas. He was still doing that. The Kotzk Rebbe was nifta in 1859, so in 1838, 21 years before he was nifta, there was and this is the most important conversation we're going to have right now is the next 2 minutes. Almost everything you can read on Kotzk is a lie. I've read a lot. I've read in Yiddish, in Hebrew, and in English. I think anything that's out there. I went to the library many, many times and took out many Yiddish Haskalah works. I read them all. And it's like somebody grabbed onto... Now, if you're a little bit of a Baldinian, if you're a little delusionary, if you're a little dramatic, Kotzk Rebbe is going to be your guy to write about. Now, if you're a Moskel in 1926 Berlin, who's mad at your Hasidic upbringing, looking to write a story and create a play around a figure who's going to lend himself to every dimion and everything you want to say, Kotzk Rebbe is your guy, because he was a revolutionary to Hasidus, right? So he's my guy. And then there's the drama and what happened, and was he or did he not, and the break-off. And what happened is it was like somebody dropped this pill and it exploded. You know those little things you can buy in the dollar store? Like you put them in the bath for your kids, like a little
the little foam things.
Yeah,
that
then they
the water,
explode.
yeah.
So the Kotzk Rebbe was this figure. Now, no one wrote about the Kotzk Rebbe after he died for many years because they were scared to. The Avnei Nezer said Kotzk Rebbe burnt his Chiddushei Torah. He left over nothing. When they came to Avnei Nezer to write a sefer, the Avnei Nezer said he left over living svarim. End. Now, let's take Torah. The biggest gedolim in modern in the evolution of Peilush Eilam HaTorah, or among the biggest for sure. I'm not the one to decide who is Chiddushim, the Avnei Nezer. That means Milan Gadol, go into any Beis Medrash and any sugi and take out look at Chiddushim and
Litvish, Chassidish, anywhere.
Right. I'm saying both of them were openly humbled before the Kotzk Rebbe's Torah. The Avnei Nezer writes about his shver in ways that he doesn't use the word goyin on anybody else. Talks about the Torah. The Chiddushim said over and over about the amkus of his Rebbe and learning. So these were serious people that till today, because there's a record. They were talmidim the Kotzk Rebbe. Stop. Okay, so let's say it's hard for me to sit here and speak out the things that are written about the Kotzk Rebbe because I'm not comfortable saying that. But the Chozeh of Lublin, after he died, wrote about. So he wasn't a person who was flagrantly, openly violating halachas in the Torah. There's no having it that's true. Second of all, this is also important. This is an article biography. I'm not in the business. I don't even know how to pronounce that word. Hagiography?
Hagiography.
This is like the hagiography where it comes at me. Anytime I ever did a podcast or interview with anybody, ask about the hagiography. He writes hagiography. Besser writes hagiographies. I don't know what hagiography means. But I write books to inspire people. I want them to feel what I feel when I'm inspired. I'm ready to do the work of researching as much as I'm able and trying to tell the story as much as I'm able is good. Now, if there's a negative detail about a gadol that I know, let's say I'm writing about a gadol and they're humans, and humans sometimes make mistakes. They do averos, and even the biggest gedolim also clap al Yom Kippur. So let's say I'm aware of vice or a mistake that they had that they worked on. I'm not going to share it if I don't think there's a tayalis. If I think that there is, of course I will. If I think that there's gain to be shared, but if I hear something petty or silly or they were in a yeshiva and that yeshiva had a machlaikas, I'm not going to write that. Now you can say hagiography as long as you want. Okay, so be it. Don't buy my books. I'm here to inspire people. I'm not here to cover up. I'm not here to lie. If I myself don't find myself revering this figure because of that story, I won't do the book. If I'm doing the book, I revere them. So how do I make peace with the fact that they had a machlaikas in their yeshiva? Doesn't concern me. I think that they're humans. I think maybe it was their fault. Maybe it was the other guy's fault. Maybe it was the wife's fault. Maybe it was the shviga's fault. I don't know. It's not my story that I'm telling. So if you're coming to this book on the Kotzk Rebbe, say, we're going to find out what happened on that fateful Friday night. You can Google the words "that fateful Friday night" and don't write Kotzk, and Kotzk will come up. Okay? This is not your book. It is a standard article hagiography written by the hagiographer of all hagiographers, Yisroel Besser, and we're mamish here. We're here to pull wool over your eyes, right? And we're here to make you stop it. Is the point coming across what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like if you're looking, like I don't feel bad or lesser because somebody says, "Oh yeah, you're here." I'm a hagiographer. I don't think so. I think I'm a from biographer, and I'm here to inspire, bound by the halachas as well of lashon hara, kavat talmid chacham. But I just want to say, and this is what's so important to me, in the case of the Kotzk Rebbe, it's proven rechilas. I'll give you an example. There's a very, very well-regarded writer, a secular writer who wrote on Kotzk. And he writes something along the lines, the Kotzk Rebbe grew up in a city called Goray, Gorajy. I read it with Y because that's the way, a lot of these cities in Europe, there's confusion because Jews call it one thing, and if you look at a map, it's called another thing. So this person writes, like I said, a very well-regarded scholar and lecturer and academic. And he writes, also famous as being the city, much later, where the Bilgaraya came from, the Belzer Rebbe's father. The current Belzer Rebbe's father was Reverend Bilgaraya, right? If you know anything about anything, that's not there's no shaykhs. It's like saying that Kensington, where Beis HaTalmud is Kensington Gardens in England. You know what I mean? It's like, what are you saying? You're making Zayashava between things you know nothing about. And I would read these books, Nachi, and I would just see fallacy after fallacy, things that are basics to me, because I grew up where I grew up, just knowing stuff. Your dates are off, your places are off. So you expect me to believe you that the Kotzk Rebbe threw his becher on the floor when on every page you're saying things that just show such a amaratzas in the setting and the time. You like that detail, so you're building your whole story around that detail because it's dramatic, it's poetic, it feeds your agenda. It's so there's really very little that anybody knows about the Kotzk Rebbe. Before I get to Ishbitz, the fateful Friday night. There is a book that's authoritative. I consider it authoritative. To me, it's called Der Kotzk Rebbe. It's Yiddish. I own it. It was written by a guy named Glickman. He lived in Lodz. He interviewed in the book, sources it, with Einiglich of the Kotzk Rebbe and by people who remembered the first generation of Kotzk Hasidim. He has Askamas on his book from the, in the 1930s, the Einiglich who were the Kotzk Rebbes at the time, Reb David of Sachachev, the Sokolover, and all those. He writes, it's not a hagiography, even though he writes honest things about Kotzk. He writes about the intolerance, the stuff that the worker broke up with him over. He writes about the breakup with Ishbitz, which we still have to get to. But he a lot of these stuff, he debunks them much better than I ever could from people who are in the room. The years of solitude, Tkufas HaHeskot. Kotzk Rebbe is reportedly to have been locked in his room for the last 20 years. Yeah? Then you learn Shem Shmuel, the Sachachav, his Zainikel, and he writes stuff that the Adonai still went in every day. The Rebbetzin went in. Chassidim went in. There was a Yidin Rebbe Tzion Ostrover, Tzion Rabinovich, from the city of Ostrov. He was very famous. More recently, he was one of the most famous Kotzker Chassidim. He traveled all the way till the Emiramis. He was an old man, and everybody listened to his stories. He's famous because he's Rav Hutner, of Yitzchak Hutner's great uncle, and Rav Hutner was very influenced by him in Varsha, Tzion Ostrover. And he writes a story in those last years when ostensibly the Kotzker was completely locked off in the world about a bunch of kids who came in. One was Yasam. They went into the Rebbe and they said, "What does it mean to be a Yid?" And it's in the book, and he showed them the tzitz, whatever. Exchanges that people got in. Now, the access was not like before, nothing to talk about. Kotzk Rebbe's mood was not like before. I think that maybe there was a certain level of despair. Again, it's not for me to sit here and speculate. But he had tried to accomplish something, and while he was very successful to a degree, it wasn't completely realized his vision of having, because ultimately, everybody cares that they need to make a shidduch for their daughter, and everyone cares about Parnasa. That means, with a few exceptions, I think that to a degree, he took a step back and said, okay, which brings us to Ishbitz. It's a Chozeh of 1938. Very similar to what happened with the Yiddish Kaddish and the Chozeh. There was already, when one of the Hasidim is sort of, fearing Tish Fazich, when he's leading his own, being too independent, what happens is, it creates a certain distrust, maybe. And the Ishbitzer was welcoming people to Kotzk and still taking care of them. He was listening to their problems. Others in the Kotzk Rebbe's Chabur probably saw that as a affront to the Rebbe. And again, depending on what you read, there's varying degrees of who made the first move. The Ishbitzer used to get a certain akafa every year and he didn't get it. Maybe yes, maybe no, I wasn't there. But that was considered as an act of being marchikim. And the Ishbitzer left. The Ishbitzer walked out, went back to his lodging to Zachsania with a bunch of Chassidim and said, we're making a karfas. Over here, Chassidim need a rabbi. They need a rabbi they can speak to. They need a rabbi who speaks to them. And the Ishbitzer, by all accounts, by everybody's account, was a tzaddik, and his motivations, like his rabbi, were completely lishma. It was, nobody who has their own illusions of taking weights until so many years later to do it. He was there till almost till the end, just a few, And he went back to Chazal. He couldn't do it anymore. He said the people need a rabbi. And the next day, Chozeh got up and spoke by Akafas. Kalam Achubel Taratar. He said a famous Torah that why is something that's connected to Torah automatically Torah? And he was saying that the essence is saying, if there's something more Torah than me, I'm going to be connected to that. And that's the understanding that I don't carry the Torah in myself. It's my connections that give me the Taharas. And he was basically saying, there's a tzaddik in the room, and even if he's not as vibrant or as active or as involved as he once was, our connection to him is itself a Rebbe. The Ishbitzer left. There's a story how the Ishbitzer early on, the stories were coming back to Kotzk. What was going on in Ishbitz? He was making mifsim, he was making Yeshuas, he was doing big things for people. Bigger Yeshuas than had ever been seen in Kotzk. So the Kotzker Rebbetzin, there's always a Rebbetzin who's, came into her husband. She's like, how is it that Matchi Yosef is doing Yeshuas that you're a Rebbe that you never did? So he said, what do you think he learned here in Kotzk? Shostarai, to be a shoemaker? He learned how to daven. So he's davening. He's using his tefillah for that. I never did. That means, of course, I taught him how to daven. And with his tefillah, because he did want to help people with the ailing cow. And Kotzk, that wasn't important, right? Reportedly, depending on what you read, a lot of the people from Ishbitz did come back. The Ishbitz's, a big part of my argument that this is a lie about the Kotzker Rebbe is the fact that the Kotzker Rebbe himself said, Yiras Hashem Tahira Medas La'ad, which is, if you want to know if something's Tahira, let's see if it lasts. Medas La'ad. The Chassam Sofer said about Mendelssohn famously, Makam Shayipal Eitz Shamhu, that the Pasuk says that where the tree falls, there it is, there it lies. The Gemara says, what does that mean? The Gemara says it means where the fruits fall from a tree, that is where the tree is. If you want to know where the fallen tree was, look where the fruits are. Chassam Sofer means is that we look at the gauge of a person's success in this world by what they leave over. And he said, Mendelssohn, the Chassam Sofer told his kids, 2 generations later, they're all married to non-Jews. So that tells you about the ostensibly pure motivations. He was just trying to help. And you see this again and again. I once spoke to a great man years ago, before Breslov became so popular about Breslov, and he said, look, forget the noise. Look at the Breslov Chassidim. Look what they were like in the Holocaust. Read Chaim Shapiro's Go, My Son, if you could, about one Breslov Yid that he met in Siberia. A Yid who 250 years ago could light a fire that's keeping people like that. look what Klal Yisrael has from these people, and that tells you itself. So that's a big part of what of my argument at Kotzk. I think the same argument can be made for Ishbitz, Blei Bleiga, Tzadik. Tzadik's name is heard daily. These are the ranking. So it tells you that each one that each one was Mechavan L'Shem Shemayim, because it's Sefer L'Skayim. Again, it's a yeshivish argument maybe, and it's not a very academic argument. I'm not an academic. Okay, I'm not yeshivish either, but whatever. That's another shmooze. But it's, you see the enduring truth of each one. Side the Ishbitzer and side the Kotzker. So to again, I can't sit here and tell you there's no right or wrong.
So essentially, the last years are not discussed in the book.
I discussed it in as much as I try to prove, so to speak, of different things and sources of things that happened in the last years, will show that it's certainly not like the dramatic Haskalah journals.
And I do want to say, there's a book from Dr. Morris Fairstein I've had on the podcast, and who's an academic, and Truth Springs from the Earth. He wrote a book about Kotzk, and he has a whole appendix there that he talks about the alleged incident. But what he does say in the book, he says that he quotes the stories, but now the story is repeated so many times that it's believed and repeated by virtually all authors writing about Menachem Mendel, even though he says in italics there is not a shred of evidence to support it, is what he writes. And this is an academic. He says there's nothing to prove.
Academic support.
He says,
and
he says there's nothing, and he has a whole, he has an extensive appendix also discussing. And in the appendix he goes through each, probably there's this, he did that, this one, and he says just to point out, and this for anyone interested, again, you can check out his book, which is on Amazon. Let me get. He really goes through it and takes it down, and he also says, finally, the motives of those who disseminate this legend must be considered. He quotes one of them was anti-Hasidim, and one was Mizrahi. He says one was here, against Kodesh Yisrael. It was Ger, it was Kotzk. He goes through all of them, and he says the solution to this puzzle most probably lies in a combination of all these factors. The legend of the Friday night incident seems to have arisen from a convergence of Menachem Mendel's inclusion, and he says the rumors circulating about the reason's inclusion, and someone has embraced Vaskol, and he says an examination of all the evidence, all the available evidence shows that the legend of the Friday night incident has no real factual basis. How it came into existence and gained popularity remains a subject of speculation. This is so. If anyone interested, I'm just saying. Listen, I know what you said. Your book is what it's trying to do, and that's obviously something we had to discuss what the book is going to do. But for those interested in reading more about it, again, I'll refer you to his book. You can read. He goes that appendix, really goes through it. But he says there's no shred of evidence. There's nothing to prove it. And what you're saying is, So
I'm happy to hear that.
Your purpose is not to debunk it. You're just not, like you said, not talking about it. But there is those that have read it and say, there's nothing to it.
It's so nice to hear that. But besides from it, I understand. I'm not an academic, so I'm happy that academic says it. But there's something I understand why people will do it. I understand, because if you're a writer, it's the best story in the world.
Which we said before.
It lends itself to every kind of drama and poetry, and it's just great.
I think the key thing is we don't know what happened. Right. I think we don't know, and that's
I'm
the answer.
Okay with we don't know what happened.
Correct. It's also sometimes it's okay to blame tzarachin, right? Be a brisker. It's okay to say you don't know.
But it's not tzarachin. It's we don't know what happened, and we do know what did happen. He made the Chlushirim, and he made the Avnei Nezer.
Right.
So that's a pretty good indicator of what he was.
And the repeated story, right? Exactly. So you mentioned some of his talmidim. We mentioned throughout. I was going to ask you throughout. The book is like you said. I think it's what we did on this episode where. You had the history, you have the Torah, you have the sayings, and you mix it all together, which we did here. We kind of mixed everything all together.
I don't think there was ever a book like this. To be honest with you, I'm not nothing about me. I'm not self-aggrandizing. There's no book. There's a lot. And another book on Kotzk. Yeah, there's a lot of book. If you go on Amazon, there's going to be a lot of titles on Kotzk. There's no book that kind of sweeps you into the narrative of the story, the basic biographical details, with not only the message of what he wanted, but the Torah. That means, and now suddenly you hear a Torah from the Kotzk Rebbe. It fits into the grander scheme of what the Kotzk Rebbe. It's not just a cute one-line vart, but it's a vart that fits itself into the approach of Kotzk.
So the book is throughout. You don't have it as sections as biography and then Torah. You try to blend it.
A bunch of books ago, I stopped doing. It's challenging, but I try not to write biographies that just chronological order, because every life is times that they're more productive and more rich, and times that are boring. So I try to give you like a basic sense of where he comes from, where he's going, but then I really go with topics. So it's really set up by the Kotzk Rebbe's on the emes of Kotzk, the Torah of Kotzk, the Chabura and Kotzk, the Simcha and Kotzk, the Amunah and Kotzk, and in each thing, different biographical. There's one very famous historical, which is almost an aberration, an anomaly. The Kotzk Rebbe didn't really involve himself in anything public outside of Kotzk as a Chassidim. He took a very public stance. Two things. One is on the Gzeres Halvosh. He went up against the Chedusha Rim and the Chachanava. He had Kotzker had a chassid of Wolf of Strikov, Wolf Landau. His father's a Wolf Landau of Strikov. Was a gain. Chachanava. Dov Landau Shlita is a Chachanava Enikel. He's a Ben Acha Adam. He's a Rebbe Enikel, which is why even though he's Litvish, he buttons his thing. He told me like the Messiah of the family, like Chachanava. Kotzker Rebbe revered the Chachanava because of his gainness, and they said that it's Yarg Valyava to get killed. The Russian government made these edicts about Yiddish clothing down to a beard and payas and wearing Jewish clothing, traditional Jewish clothing. They said it's Yarg Valyava. I guess based on the Gemara of Aksad Masani and the yellow shoelace. Kotzk says it's not Yarg Valyava, and there's no source for this, and they're being mafka Yiddish blood. They're cheapening Jewish blood by telling people to get killed. That was up against the Chedusha Rim and the Chachanava. I wrote there in the footnotes, why didn't the Chedusha Rim defer? If it's his Rebbe, like he always says, and he bet until fire, why didn't he defer? Because he was Kotzk, and he believed that this was the truth. That means I wrote it. The Kotzk Rebbe once came out Matzei Roshana. Whenever the door opened in his room, there was fear, so much so that people would run out of his medrash. He was awe-inspiring. Chedusha Rim says, you know what I'm trying to do over here? That when a Yid finds his emes, the heavens should collapse and the earth should split, but he shouldn't drop his emes. That means when you hold on to what you stand for. So Chedusha Rim was a Kotzk chassid enough that he didn't back down, because in learning, exactly what we would know in yeshivas, what we would expect when our rebbeim argued on their rebbeim in learning. So the Kotzk Rebbe, that was one, and then they changed their names. The Kotzk Rebbe's birth name wasn't Morgenstern, it was Halpern. The Chedusha Rim's birth name wasn't Alter, it was Rothenberg. They both changed their names. Again, lots of different sources why, but I think the conventional approach is that in 1830, when Tsar Nikolai made what became the Cantonist decrees, they took on the government. They supported the Polish rebellion, which lost. It was an insurgency. Which insurgency doesn't mean like by Trump on January 6th, like everybody thinks. Insurgency was a real thing. It was like there were real Polish militia going up against the Russian thing, and it lasted a couple of years, and there was a lot of Jewish money involved in supporting them, and the Kotzk Rebbe backed that, and when it failed, they destroyed all the documents that show that these two tzaddikim supported it, and they changed their last names for fear of getting caught, of getting associated with the revolution.
So I think the flavor and the style of this podcast was interesting. Also, like usually I go chronologically. I go through what you wrote the book, and here's your questions, here's the biography, and here's the Torah. We kind of went all over the place. Nice blend, which is really what the book does, and that's what the book is. That's what you're going to get in the book. As they're saying over here. And so this is really what it is. And I think first of all, I'll link in the show's notes to the book. Anyone who's interested in the book can check it out. And one final thing: what did you take from this book? I'm sure every book, and we've been discussing the podcast, maybe that's apparent, but every book, I'm sure you take something else. As you mentioned, some of your books you mentioned in the beginning of this episode. But is there something specifically you took from Kotzk, from writing this book on Kotzk? Something that really, whether it's a saying of the Kotzker or just writing about the Kotzker, researching?
There's always a struggle to do things l'shma, to be real. And at the same time, there's this need to be practical. Like I said, if we're going to wait to daven to feel like what the Kotzker ever felt, we're not going to leave our house, and we'll also tell ourselves we're tzaddikim for not leaving, which is the worst thing. There was a famous story they said in Pshescha about a Yid who married into a wealthy family. He sat and learned in the attic. This is an attic too, but this is an impressive attic. I wouldn't mind. I could hang out here all day, but he hung out all day. And every so often his in-laws would come peek on him, or his wife would come look at him. They brought some food, and when he felt them coming up the stairs, as is human nature, he learned a little louder. Oh, yeah, his davening was a little more fervor, and he really took it up a notch for the audience. This went on for many, many years. One day he had to leave the room. He had to go out for something, and he sees that there's a cat with kittens living on the steps. And he realizes that all those years, no one was ever coming to look at him. It was just the cat. So I'm just going to say, take a learn for the cats. He's learned for 20 years for the sake of to impress the cat, mocking people who do things for other people. I brought in the footnotes. In some sources they say, but the Kotzk Chassidim would say, a galant hata. Lumais is 20 years of Torah and Avaida that he knows because of that cat. Fine, he was inspired by the cat. So what I took out of the Kotzker book is to try to ask myself before I do things, well, really, why are you doing this? We tell ourselves we're doing things. I have to go to that guy's chasana. I have to be mevaka, because and we tell ourselves all these things. And you stop and think, what's the reason you're really going it? Motivation. But at the same time, you still have to do the things you have to do. Not to it could lead you to real depression, to live your life if you're not built for it. No names now, but I know people who are Kotzk Chassidim. I know people who are able to do this. I know people in the world who really are on that madrega that they ask themselves before, I'm not. So you have to live in this world between understanding that we rely on other people's appreciation and admiration and acknowledgement to keep going. But at the same time, to leave something over for the rebbeim Shalom. To sometimes, once a day, whatever, everybody in their own way, do something that you really know is for God and nobody's going to know you're doing. I would like to say I just ruined it. I think by I have to tell you one more story, and I know we're out of time. The Kotzker Chassid was dying. He was on his deathbed. So Chassidim asked him, Rabbi Yankel, it was done. Geistesing. Is the Yisroel still trying to get you now? So he says, yeah, the Yisroel is after me, because they would talk very openly about the Muhammad Yisroel. They said, what's he telling you? He's telling me, Yankel, Zuga Heicha Kriyashma, say a Kriyashma, like a big Kriyashma, that the Ilm will say, what a Kriyashma that was when he went out. But ich weise him a feig, which means in English, I'm showing him a fig, which is like I'm blowing him off. I'm telling him no, I'm turning him down. It was a very impressive story. So everyone was impressed that the Kotzker guy on his deathbed they told the story to the Kotzker Rebbe. So the Kotzker Rebbe said, Yatzin Nishmasa b'fag. He told the story. That means Yitzhahar got him to tell the story. He didn't. He should have said, meaning in Kotzk, he should have said nothing. No, the Yitzhahar is not getting me. Instead, he had that joy of telling the story. Everyone said, what a story. Boom.
I think with that, really, it's a good note to end on. Everyone can
I want to thank you for having me here. I want to thank you for welcoming me. I have to be honest, I was very intimidated to do this podcast. I think you know that. We've talked about it over the years. I just said, I'm not for the learned guys. I'm not for the scholarly. I'm not for the academics. I'm not for the people who get to be friends with people like Shirley Weinstein and could roll with such intellectuals. It's not me. This is out of my league. And still, it's true that it's out of my league, but you're so friendly and so welcoming that this was a pleasant experience. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the kind words, and I appreciate you finally doing this. Finally can get you on, and hopefully the listeners enjoy this, and we'll have to have you back. You have so many books and topics, things to talk about. Do you know what you're working on next, or you're not going to reveal that yet?
I generally don't like to talk about what I'm working on for a lot of reasons. There is a project I would talk about here if you're so generous to offer it, because a lot of times I get stories from people. And I read about recently the Parag Gedalim. I like to mention it because people say I'm writing a book of Mirza Hashem on Baruch Mordechai Ezrachi. He would have loved talking with you, Svarim. That man loved talking about Svarim and learning and everything, history, Gedalim. So that's one of my newer projects. A bunch of other things also, Bezos Hashem. But that one, I would welcome anybody's memories, inside stories, Torah. Thank you, Nachi.
Okay. Thank you absolutely for joining me.